So
Yeah,
thank you, Phil, for coming and supporting us as usual, supporting the MTF as you do so much. We're very grateful for that. And Phil's, as you know, is the senior policy, operational, and policy manager for the and national lead for, gosh, net zero food for NHS England. That's a very long title.
we love long badges, don't we?
You certainly do. But the most important thing that Phil does is to keep it all together. He dips in and out of everybody who's doing good stuff about food. And that's really important. And we appreciate that a lot. So Phil's going to be talking about empowering recovery, national food standards in healthcare. So over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Leslie. Let's get to work. So here we go. Okay, can everybody see that, hopefully? Yeah, no thumbs up, no, but is that okay?
Yes, that's fine. Thank
Oh,
you.
cool, brilliant. Okie dokie. So I suppose, a chance to just give people a bit of an update on where we are. And I got to say, Kate, I'm never cease to amaze the lovely words that you use to describe, how we should be, like myself's title here, the empowering recovery, and how we can change our styles as well, in the way we shop and the way we look after each other. Never more important than in the time we are now. Incredibly pressured times for people, not just financially, but with our different lifestyles and cultures, and our family situations, where not everybody has got the network around them to hopefully move forward. And this is my chance, I suppose, to just share with you a few areas about, well, what are our responsibilities within the NHS, and particularly around food service. And of course, being able to sort of update in the way that we can from the areas that are out there, but also what can we also bring in the weeks, months, and years to come to continue the momentum that we have had. And often people say, well, what was the starting point? Well, it's often going back, and I remember the conversation with Diane when I was asked to lead the food review, and her and I mean, in fact, Diane was the first one to call me, and we had this conversation about, well, what is the starting point? And we must not forget the work that took place with standards in the past, and it is taking the best out of that and bringing it forward. So things like, for example, the nursing responsibility and the element of traditional menus. So there were things that we were doing well and we were doing right, but there are other things, because of our changing situation here in the country. It's important that we try and understand the way forward. And of course, with the review, we looked back at lots of areas around reviews, reports that took place, trying to understand what can we achieve, and also what's the longer term plan and commitment, particularly for our elderly. Most of our hospitals have got 85% of the vulnerable and elderly. How do we look after them? And that's something that I'll pick up as we move along. But for me, it was a chance to sort of make that change, make it more permanent, try and understand what changes could we make straight away, how can we plan over the next 3 years, but then also what's the longer term plan and the commitment from the wider teams in the NHS. Just to remind people that the 8 recommendations that we spoke about obviously focused a lot of elements around the issues that we're currently facing up. But I just want to pick up on a couple now, and I think it's appropriate for today. Our catering staff support, and how can we ensure that nutrition and hydration is very much part of our planning for the future. And it's great that we've been able to be linked into the wider new hospital program, and also some of the refurbishments that are going on. So, for example, we're looking how can we ensure that our small ward kitchens, our pantries, our main kitchens, our central production units are actually set up in a way that are fit for the future? And also, how do we look after our patients and our staff on a day-to-day basis in sort of those little hydration hubs that we should be having in our wards? Often when you go and visit in a hospital, it is incredibly spread out over a large site, and it's impossible for people to get out and about, with the short time that they have available. So it's important that we plan effectively and we have these areas that are accessible. And they're starting to hold ingredients and choices that are appropriate for all of our ages. What we're finding out in the work that we're doing is that there is so much variety, which in one way is great, but it also gives us inconsistency. So we have to find that balance of ensuring that everybody has the choice and the accessibility to those products, but we also have to think about our catering staff support. So how do we ensure that the focus on our teams gives them the tools to look after the people at the right time with the right ability? And often we look at the way we serve our patients, particularly the elderly, and it is very institutional. And we understand that a lot of people will like that 7:30 brekkie, 12 o'clock lunch, and 5 o'clock, 5:30 dinner. But also, a lot of people like the flexibility of lighter meal times, but a chance to graze throughout the day. So it's again, that puts pressure on our teams to ensure that we have that ability and we're able to drive that attitude of meeting the patient's needs rather than thinking about what fits into the staff schedule. So just to let people know that the review gave us a tremendous opportunity to look at the standards that we had a number of reviewing of standards take place. But what we wanted to have, and two real main areas through the recommendations, were to have food standards that we could have as mandatory, and we would have a 3-year program that would be funded by the Department of Health. And that enabled us to have some breathing time, to get out and speak to people, to listen to those experts that are in the field and are making us aware of the changes that also are likely to take place. But of course, have standards that in effect would try and give us a bit of a foothold in being able to influence change for the future. And as you can see here, these 8 standards that now give us that priority of focus on our patients, on our teams, and putting food at the top of the agenda. I'll come back to leadership and 24/7 in a bit, but just so people understand what we've tried to push out through the standards that were launched in November last year. Having a food and drink strategy tells us whether we are an acute, whether we're community or mental health. It helps us to focus on our patient acuity. A food and drink strategy for our patients, and also getting our different teams within our hospital setting together to discuss each other's needs. So great talking about the feeds and the nutritional element and the hydration, but it's also a chance to talk about those teams and the way that their workforce are able to meet the needs or not, and therefore what training do they need. There's a lot of challenges that we are facing right now where there can be a break between our catering teams, our distribution of the food, and then our ward teams. And then of course, in our wards, we have our nursing, we have our wider clinical, we have our allied health professionals, and often we'll have our housekeepers and our hosts. So again, you've got sometimes competing streams there, which can cause a real issue and not put the patient at the center of our service. We've asked a few things really to come into play. We know that the review is from food safety, so we've added that food safety specialist role we also need that catering dietetic role. So as we look at our patients and we decide, what do they need, we've got the right people on hand there to ensure that our menus are balanced and they're meeting the needs of all of our patients. Promoting our workforce is so important. We often talk about the patient at the center of what we do, but actually, if we don't promote our workforce, then we have a real issue about them understanding their role. Everybody has a role to play, and it's taken everybody's voice into account to ensure that we move forward together. So we've done a lot of promotional work, particularly things like NHS Chef, which we've just completed, but also linking with our Chef's Academy that we do, and our training elements with our dietetic teams to help them understand what it means to be a catering dietitian and not a clinical dietitian. So there are different needs around that. And of course, working with our estates and facilities matrons who have a particular role to actually link with our workforce in facilities and understand the pressures that they're under, but also helping them to conform to what we need at ward level. So again, we know, there can often be confusing structures in the NHS, but it's ensuring that everyone has that focus. I'll pick up on food waste in a minute, but leadership, we talked right at the beginning about the clarity of leadership and what it should be doing, and having our chief nurse, our chief exec, and having our lead dietitian, having them focused on the needs of how we should be looking after our patients through food and drink. That is so important to realize that we need to have a menu that, of course, is sustainable and flexible and adaptable to what we need, but there is also a real balance and a real structure that everybody understands. And of course, if we want to look after our staff and look after our patients, it needs to be 24/7. I think we've sort of generally accepted that at ward level, we are working 24/7, and it may be easier to promote things and make things available. But what we have learned over the months is that the pressure on our ward teams, particularly after 8 o'clock in the evening, with a reduction of staff, it is very difficult to give everybody that they need. So and I know a few things have been picked up over the coming days on things like the opening of packets, and I know Andy mentioned around the sauce sachets, but we also look at things like butter portions, all these different things that we serve to our patients. They need to be easy to open, they need to be ready to eat. It's no good putting something in front of a patient and they can't reach it or they can't open it. It needs to be at its best at the point of service, whether that's hot, cold, meals or snacks. So thinking of the person receiving as soon as we offer that food and drink. So really a big thing that we focused on is around our food waste. And you may think, well, what has this got to do with the elderly and the vulnerable and our patients? Well, it's a massive area of improvement that is happening and must continue to happen. And the reason I'm saying this is it's the way we serve our food. That can either be in portion control, it can be on the crockery that we use, it can also be the way that we take our menu ordering. So, for example, some of the work that we did with the elderly is understanding that they need to be smaller portions, and we need to make it applicable that if they want more, they can have more. It needs to be served in a way that they are wanting it to be served. Sometimes it may be, gravy being separate, or it may be actually added quite early and keeping the food nice and moist. The food needs to be recognizable, so we're not hiding food, but it's actually sometimes plainer. So it's something that they understand what it is. We often talk about menus reflecting our regions. When you are a patient and you come into hospital, you're in a place, one, that you're not used to. And we want them to be able to feel that when they look at a menu, they actually recognize items on that menu. We know that Nottingham some time ago led brilliantly on memory menus, and that is patients actually choosing menus that they identify really easily to be on their hospital menu. So when they come into that hospital setting, they're looking at menus that they recognize. So it's important that we do that. We actually have crockery that we feel enhances the food, and it's understanding as well is what we're serving on is something that people are used to. So when we take an order, the first thing we should be saying is, when do you normally have your main course? When do you normally have a snack? So we can either decide when do they want to eat that fuller meal, and then also how do they eat it? Do they prefer to sit up in bed? Do they want to actually sit in the chair next door to their bed, or would they prefer to sit with a few people in a small dining room or hub area so they can actually start to enjoy that company and that chitter chatter that happens that is often part of recovery? And all these things are happening because for the first time ever, as part of the food standards, we are now measuring our food waste consistently. The same template for everybody. And we're saying to EFM directors, whatever money you save, then we need that reinvested back into our services. Don't give it up as a cost saving. Keep it in your budget, but use it in the way that you can buy better ingredients. You may be able to buy better crockery. You can enhance your services with more training for your workforce. We firmly believe that the true value of food waste is around £26 million. When that gets out to the press early next year through the ERIC that we have, which is a states and reconciliation data, information comes into the centre, and that messaging will then come out. We know it's kind of fall off your chair time when they start to see those sorts of figures. So we need to be prepared that often with a story that comes out that it hits the headlines, we have to turn around and say, do you know what? We know this wasn't the message in the past, but this is the first time that we've started to understand the true value of food waste in the NHS. But what we are doing is stop talking about it and actually actioning what we need to do. So we need to prepare our teams that will happen, and how can they enhance our food services, particularly for our elderly and vulnerable, as we move forward. We're coming towards the end of year 3 now, which was funded by the Department of Health for our Great Food, Good Health programme. We will initiate a run-in hospital food improvement programme. And for me at the moment, these are probably the 4 key elements that will sort of help us to influence and innovate with teams, with our suppliers, through equipment and through food. We know that 24/7 is a topic that is, really hot up there, because with all the pressures on our workforce, it is how we look after them, as well as at ward level. We know that leadership is key. Often people say to me, well, how do I become an exemplar site? How do I become a site that is leading the way and doing all of the right things? The core ingredient that you need is leadership, at the very top. You need somebody at board level that is willing to talk and listen about food and drink. What are the menus like right now? How are we refreshing them? Why are we ordering sandwiches for hospitality at the board meeting and not bringing in the food trolley and actually serving patient meals, so the board actually understand what food we are serving to our patients? How can we initiate the food and drink standards throughout the time to ensure that everybody gets to a point where they feel comfortable about where they are, a solid platform, but they can continue that improvement? We've shared a survey out recently to help us understand where people are with those food and drink standards. And generally, I think people are 85% on the way there, but there is lots of room for improvement. We think that, once they get up towards 90%, then the parameters will change to help them re-improve where they are. And we've just finished the NHS Chef 2023 competition, and there were wide elements of the different skills. This is probably like no other competition where we expect people to think about 24/7 challenges, to think about children's and young people, about our high density meals, so smaller portions, but the same suitable nutrition in that food. We're trying to think about a balanced plate. So when it comes to things like sustainability and our lower carbon choices, there still needs to be that nutrition in there. Our chefs face more challenges than probably any other environment. We often say, in what other environment are you trying to feed around 500 to 600 people at the same time? Those people don't probably want to be there. They're there because they have to be there. And we have a wide range of diets, of cultural and religious aspects. So we are in a challenging environment, but it is no excuse for not wanting to be the best. Competition actually told us that our winners were in East Lancashire. That's the second time that they've won it. We actually introduced Lisa Goodwin-Allen, an amazing chef. She came to speak to all of our teams, was part of the judging panel. And some of the food that we saw told us that our chefs actually do understand what our patients need. But what they need to do is communicate those needs to ward level. Chefs need to go to ward level more often. They need to be front of house, not back of house. They need to step forward and start to be proud of what they're serving, go and speak to patients, listen to their concerns, and also listen to their ideas of what they would like to see on the menu. So it's important that we stay adaptable. We continue that journey of how we can sort of improve our choices. And I know that something that is very close to both my heart and Neil, who's going to speak later today, is how can we think about that next step, about how when people are looking to leave hospital, what can we do to actually bridge that gap? Everybody talks about health and social care being joined up. But in theory, there are many practices now that still have that divide. So we need patients to be going home, one, with a food package, because they haven't all got the supportive mechanism around them when they get home, but also with the knowledge. If they've been eating something that they enjoy, can we give them a recipe? Can we give them a link to a company where maybe that food, originates from, or actually a continuing link to our teams? So when they need certain foods, they've got someone to talk to. Food is at the center of the way we work and the way we live. And it's important that we put people at the center around food and drink so we can continue that conversation. Great food does bring good health, and it's important that it stays at the top of the agenda. And hopefully, certainly through MTF, I know that's important to us.
Thanks, Phil. That was great, as always. Thanks for sharing this really difficult task about how we all work together to get good, nutritious food into patients, because we know that, so many people, older people particularly, are being admitted into hospital already malnourished and poorly and needing something done. And that job of making sure that they don't lose any more weight, that they get the nutrition that they need, is really difficult. And I think what you say about working together is just so important. And also, we really have got to concentrate on the clinical side as well, about how we're getting that food from the plate to the mouth, thinking about all the workforce issues and how difficult it is for short-staffed wards to feed patients, and how long it takes somebody to eat, and that we all know that, and we're very supportive of that. I think one of the things you were saying about going home with a food package
Mm.
is really good, because we know from some of the Age UK discharge schemes that we run that food is often the thing that lets people down, that they become even more malnourished, and then they lose their strength, and then they become ill, and then they're readmitted. So you're right. We've got to really pull together to make this work in the community. And
I
we'll
think,
hear from
yeah,
Neil later about Meals on Wheels, which is another problem.
yeah,
Sorry.
and I think, Leslie, it'll be a good topic for us as a team to take forward, because I think we can help bridge that gap. You know, the one thing that often will come out is when you put forward an idea. I mean, we called them kindness bags for many years in Somerset, and but it was very basic. It was all cold, it was all refrigerated, it was easy things to manage. And I think we need to go a step further. But often the things that come at us, well, there's a cost. Well, the cost of that patient coming back in hospital is far bigger than being able to look after them as they come out. So yeah, picking up on a couple of things. I mean, Andy's mentioned the cabinet office. We are actually linking with them around this, and Neil and I have linked up on a few exemplar sites that are doing things. And also, Diane's mentioned around leadership at board level, and how do we ensure that it does happen? So in the we call it PAM, premises assurance model. It's something that we do to understand where people moving on policy and standards. Trust are telling us what they have and are achieving. So we will understand on every single standard what are people, where they're moving on, and where the leadership and who the leadership is. So and it'll be interesting to find out who are the leaders. Is it 60-70% the chief nurse? Is it the finance officer? Is it the estates and facilities? I mean, you and I have always believed that we want that nursing lead, really, don't we? But again, there is that variable at ward level where you get nurses that have got more of an interest in nutrition and hydration than others.
Yeah.
So that can also be variable. But yeah, well, we know it's a job forever, don't we? This role, we know it's forever moving, and I think that we're very fortunate. We've got lots of passionate people that are willing to support us.
I think you're right. And when sometimes we think, oh gosh, we haven't really done that much. But then you look back and you think, wow, these things have changed because of all these people in this sector who are working so hard. And that really is something to be proud of, isn't it?
I think so.
That, everybody needs a shout out how hard people have been working. Well, thank you, Phil.
You're
And
welcome.
again, if there's any questions, pop them in the chat and I can pass them on. And I'm sure that he will happily answer them later. So thanks a lot.